There's just a little bit of a delay. I'm gonna call this sorry.
On May 19th, you received the final report from the Springfield Fiscal Stability Task Force and started a conversation on the recommendations. Tonight is a continuation of that conversation. Staff will use the guidance on which recommendations you have been pursuing, as well as the prioritization of the recommendations. Based on feedback tonight, staff's goal is to begin work on some of those items, wanting some recess and bring that information back to you in work session or multiple in the fall. And then to help tonight's conversation, we created a potential implementation timeline for the recommendations that have a positive impact on the city's general fund, as well as a corresponding 5-year forecast that shows that impact. And if you could bring up the timeline. And I'll talk to you that briefly. We make that bigger. Yeah. All right. So recommendations up here, 2 of them, same recommendation, just 2 potential ways of approaching it. Levy, that's already been in front of you and is in motion and will be on the ballot in November. That one will take effect on July 1st, 2026, which is the beginning of fiscal year 27. The second one is the library reduction scenario. One potential is, and just I should probably briefly say, this is based on assumptions, and those assumptions are a realistic time frame, but also because we're dealing with the deficit spend starting in fiscal year 27, impacts our 5-year forecast or engages it as soon as possible. And so that's kind of what's driven this, just kind of our best recommendation as caretakers of the city's fiscal health. So library reduction, we'd be in front of council in the fall with kind of, if you're wanting to move forward with that recommendation, we would incorporate it into the fiscal year 27 budget process. That also would take effect on July 1st, 2026 and beginning in fiscal year 27. The next, let's see, items 3 and 4, it's the payroll tax option. Option 1 is in front of you in the fall where you just implement payroll tax. From conversations we've had with Eugene based on their experience, we should allow ourselves about a year time frame to implement that. That's educating the business community on administering that, as well as advance notice for the payroll services such as ADP to code to their program. That then would take effect on, I can read that, halfway through fiscal year 27. So I think it should be January, January of 27. But we wouldn't see tax receipts until the second quarter of that year. So we would see them at the tail end of fiscal year 27, the last 3 months of 27. The next option, though, is the same where we're in front of you in the fall talking about the payroll tax. But if you decide to put it on the ballot, we took a May ballot for that, giving ourselves a year to implement that from July 1st, 26 to June 30th, 27. And then it would go live on July 1st, 27, again, 3 months before we'd see those receipts coming in. So we'd see those coming in the second quarter of fiscal year 28. And then the last item is the police levy. Similar to the fire levy, it's on its own time frame already. We're going to be in front of you in the spring of 2027, with that potentially going on the ballot in November of 27, and that would take effect on July 1st, 28, or the beginning of fiscal year 29. And then if we follow this implementation scenario, the 5-year 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 5-year
Nancy, will you know which payroll tax you
Yeah.
chose for the forecast?
So for the five-year forecast, we took the option of where you would just implement the payroll tax without putting it on the ballot, and just it impacts the general fund sooner. All right, so fiscal years 27 through 31, about mid down is the five-year forecast, starting with the deficit spend of about 2.6 million in fiscal year 27, growing to 6.3 million in fiscal year 31. And then I've layered in based on those recommendations. So you have the library reduction happening in fiscal year 27. I believe it was the last quarter for the payroll tax in 27. And then the fire levy takes place in 27. And then going out to fiscal year 29 is where the police levy would then take effect. And you can see how those four recommendations alone positively impact the five-year forecast.
Is it payroll tax done by the council, or is it gonna be a vote?
Well, there's two potentials. So you just implement, and that's what I actually used for this five-year forecast. The other ones, if you were to put it on a ballot and with see the receipts coming in 6 months later. So that would just shift the payroll tax. You wouldn't see anything in fiscal year 27.
If it passed.
If thank you. And then a smaller amount in fiscal year 28, but then roughly those amounts from those years outward. So another thing we need this evening from you is after we've had a conversation on the recommendations, also as an attachment is a public engagement packet. And Lise has some questions for you regarding the plan for public engagement over the summer months and depending on the recommendations that you want to move forward with.
Let's go to Councilor Rodley first.
What I'm not seeing on here that came up in our initial conversation is a library levy as a potential revenue.
So one of the recommendations of the task force.
So you model just specifically what was on the task force until we could give you better.
Yes.
Okay.
All of this really at the end of the day is up to you as a council to decide how you like to approach it. This is a potential scenario. Go ahead.
But
Does this budget include the transient lodging tax? I know we weren't getting that from the Glenwood properties because it was the zip code. Are those
that's
funds addressed and they're included in all of the numbers that we're looking at?
okay. So things we got to figure out. One is the questions for you, and then the questions, more broadly for Elise about what public engagement should look like. So do you guys want to take this in? You want to see all the material first and then dive into it, or do you want to talk about what Nathan needs to kind of get us into the fall first? I think so too. So Nathan, you're looking for us to tell you, hey, we're probably gonna see this again in, I don't know if it was the 2nd of September or the 1st of September, whatever the first meeting back in September is. So you need some direction on what we're interested in pursuing. We're gonna add things so they can gather information, right? So like there's interested, material on a library levy. And what we're supportive of going into that meeting. So who wants to dive in first? Or clarifying questions, right? This could be a lively discussion.
Well, I have a-
Go ahead.
So as part of that conversation, when we come back at the end of our break, one thing that would be helpful for me in regards to the conversation around the library is understanding what each component of the library costs the city. So just events, the book, all of the different components, like what is the core service and what have we, kind of built upon as we've gone forward and all of, what are we buffering for the school district? What are we buffering for family? Are there are there ways to build some gap reduction in there? It's kind of I just think it would be helpful to have that conversation around what we're actually spending to run the library in all of the different areas.
Okay, so I think how I'd approach that then is just the minimum staffing required to just have open hours. And then from there, all the programming that the library does, how that, what the demand is hours wise.
Yeah, I think if we could delineate them, it'll help us to start having maybe a more thoughtful conversation around, the different cost components.
Counselor Rodley.
I appreciate you opening with that because I completely agree. I think it would be helpful to see what that looks like. I think that, because for me, and I have been thinking about this a lot in terms of how we've grown and we've put the library and the museum together. So I would be really interested in sort of seeing if we're talking about just library heads, what are we talking about? I personally am not supportive of cutting hours from the library. I think it's one of the third spaces that we have in this town, one of the only ones that's available for people to access computers and to all of the things that we have heard about from people. And additionally, in terms of the conversations that we've had so far, I have had many, many people come and talk to me or send things or want to talk about the library and supporting it. I've had no one come and say, I can't wait to cut the library. So I think we need to look at that very carefully and think about that because I completely agree with Counselor Weber. I would be more interested in looking at programming or how do we maintain the core services and the availability for people? And then how do we use that to grow and stabilize, which is why I am also interested in whether it's a library levy or what that looks like in terms of broadening our funding for the library, because I think we have heard from a lot of people how important that is and what they want that to be. And I'm looking forward to what those conversations look like over the summer from people and encourage people to come out and share that so that we can get serious about that. So that's how I completely agree with you. Let's dig into that more and understand exactly what we're talking about, what we're looking at, and what are the creative things we do, because I'm not going to be in favor of just, let's cut the library and save $500,000 compared to millions of dollars. I think it's worth it to us to figure out how to preserve that. And I'm interested in the levy, looking at that for revenue.
Okay, who wants to get in? You, Counselor Stout.
So one of the things I know the task force was not charged with was having the fire governance conversation. And I think that it's hard for me to be voting for a payroll tax unless it goes to stabilizing and establishing the fire department's future within this context of Springfield. There's been a lot of difficulties, certainly with, it's been an unhappy marriage in some ways good, but an unhappy marriage in some ways, the mix between Eugene Springfield Fire. That said, there's also, I can see certain aspects of that. I think it's really important, and not with exhaustive detail, but at least with, a reasonable level of projections. What are our options for fire governance as respect to this budget? What are our options for, what would this look like for us to have our own department? Because I know that conversation is going to come up in the fall. And the thing that really, I think the underlying plea that I've heard from the department has been, when we're requiring these firefighters to have to ask for their jobs every 5 years, and whether they're not sure if they're going to have a future with, in Springfield, they're raising their families, they're doing all their work here in Springfield. I think it's really important. My priority would be life safety, certainly above really anything else. At the same time, I do recognize the very great value that the library does create for our community. And so, like Councilor Rodley, I'm very much in favor of looking at what a library levy is. But I think it's that governance piece which was not talked about, which is I think it's important to bring up. I think my last comment is just that in voting for the higher level of fire levy, I didn't want to make that vote except to balance the budget, because I knew we needed to balance the budget in that way. It wasn't a favorite one to take because we had we hadn't gotten a chance to talk about fire governance, and I still think that's important. So that is.
Okay, anybody else?
I will, but I'm just gonna wait till.
Ready for you?
I too have done a lot of thinking about this. And I know that there's other communities around us who have councils who allow a motion and, public testimony and signs to, sort of get your decisions. And that's not how I make my decisions. My decisions are based wholly on fiscal and, the stability of our budget. And I think, even with no budget cuts to the library, it's clear that the library isn't funded the way it could be and should be. Like, there's not enough, they're running on a shoestring budget. We've had people who are volunteers who come in and say, I volunteer my time, which I think is very admirable and is awesome, but it sucks that we have a library that has to be ran by volunteers. And so I think when I've looked at other communities and I looked at the I don't know how many libraries we looked at, the communities that put their libraries on a levy separated out from their general fund, so that every year they don't have to worry about the ever shrinking general funds that we have. They have a stable method of funding that they can be responsible for that. Is a smarter way to go. I'm not in favor of a payroll tax, and we're compelling people to pay a tax to support something that, even though we haven't heard from them, they may or may not be supportive of that. We're hearing from people that are actively involved in the library. I've spoken to lots of people who are like, I don't even think about the library because I never go there. I don't have anything to do with it. But I'll tell you what, if we do a payroll tax, they're gonna know what that is. So by putting that out there to the voters on a levy for the library would truly show how valuable that is to our community. I get concerned because there's a lot of the programs and events that happen there that I think are very narrowly focused, and they focus on a certain area of our community that I don't think they reach out to everyone. And I don't, so they should be able to control that. I don't know that the government, that we should be supporting and funding those particular kind of pet projects. So I am not in favor of a payroll tax, whether it be to the voters or not, or compelling them and doing it immediately. And I really want us to look, I think we're just like easing the Band-Aid off by taking $500,000, and eventually it's going to be another 75, it's going to be this constant thing. And I just feel like they deserve to have stable funding, and that's not going to be through the general fund. It's just not.
Okay, so let's dive into a couple of different parts of this, because I think this is a helpful discussion. So I think in the fall, right, like understand bringing back information around what a library levy would potentially look like. One of the questions that I have, and I'm going to acknowledge that I hear kind of two separate themes, is really what is the headroom in our community between where we are right now from a property tax rate and compression, because when in the report, you're like, there's not that much headroom, right? So if like getting that balancing act right would be potentially really, really important. The other question about the library, and it's so hard because I know you guys are back there. I prefer to be looking right at you guys. So understanding what the implications of what those cuts would look like would be really helpful, I think, to this conversation, because I think we've got two potential things happening. One of them is, do we concentrate on hours and sort of get sort of more sharp around the hours, or do we sort of balance that with protecting programming? And I think there's a question out there, which is, hey, are we duplicating anything with the other jurisdictions between Willamette Lane, the school district, other focus, right? So I think Councilor Rodley used the term sort of harden, right? Like I hear that, Councilor Doyle, I hear that kind of in your language too, right? Which is, hey, like what is, you know, let's not make this a death by 1,000 cuts. Let's be sort of strategic about whatever we're gonna do. So I think that set of questions becomes very, like, very important here.
If you look at the numbers, we have a $2.5 million deficit. Without the library in our general fund, that's $2.3 million. Instead of trying to figure out all these things. So by eliminating that library from the general fund, it almost completely solves the problem instead of trying to do all these little things.
Here's my concern when I read the whole, when I read the whole thing, we can look at things completely differently. I hear what you're saying. I think it is a logical way to think about it. When I read it, what I see is the problem that we're gonna run into is what is essentially where the cap on property taxes. There is not, like, even if we went out to the voters and said, what are we gonna do? You know, can we solve this all, you know, through good campaigning and what people are voting for? Like, state law is not gonna allow folks to go that far as far as property taxes go. That's what I'm hearing, right? And I know you kind of go back and forth on payroll tax, and again, respect that. Is that what our constituents are telling us is they want us to protect seniors, right? And that's what came up with protect retirees, find more people to pay, right? That, you know, pay into the system, whether or not it be renters or workers or people out, you know, outside the area, and be competitive for businesses. And I think that's why, like, when the committee talked about diversification of revenue, that's where the payroll tax ended up on the limit. And I understand, I think you have a really good point, which is, hey, you guys have to be super strategic here. We can't just do one of everything, right? And we can't put ourselves in a cycle that every 5 minutes we're out in front of the voters. But I just don't see a way that this is gonna get fixed in the long term with us just 100% putting everything out to the, you know, on a 5-year operating levy.
My concern is, oh, I'm sorry.
Can we let her go?
Yeah, go ahead and then I'll.
My biggest concern is that we just keep nickel and diming this payroll tax. We've already seen it happen in Eugene. They've already increased it. It's like, and now their thing is we saved the library, but now we found another way to tax people. And so we're gonna keep. It's like sales tax, like we haven't ever voted in a sales tax, which actually sales tax would probably help, but you know, you see it get put in and then it just slowly gets more and more and more because we can, and I just don't want to see that happening.
I don't think any of us want to see that happen. And let's go to.
We're short on money, let's raise it again.
Yeah, that here is to stabilize where our finances are, and not to create this avenue where we just can turn the dial every 5 minutes when it gets uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
To that point, I also am very interested in looking at a payroll tax, and I'm not at all opposed to it. And when we had the initial conversation, it was like, how do we get it just right to start with, which I think came out of that fiscal task force as well, is like, consider starting here. I think, and I appreciate Counselor Doyle's perspective, and revenue is a real issue, and we are a growing city, and we're not alone in having to tackle it, but we can't keep doing more and not find a way to pay for it. And so, I mean, that's just the reality of that diversifying in terms of revenue. And one of the things that I do like about a payroll tax, to the mayor's point, is that it other people the way, say, property taxes do, or say a sales tax would, or things like that. So looking at the different ways that people that we can generate that revenue in a fair way. You know, we're also being surrounded by municipalities that are also doing a payroll tax, and the county's talking about doing a payroll tax. So I get there's this like, oh my gosh, they're going to tax us in a million ways. And we have these very real limitations that keep us from having the revenue that we need to do the work to make this the thriving, livable community that it needs to be. So I'm still open to the payroll tax. I'm not against it. And I hear what you say about the compression and the library levy, and would also like to just explore what that would look like. More money, I want all the money.
That's where we put you guys on both sides of it. But Mr. Blackwell, we'll go ahead.
Rob actually touched on part of that, part of the payroll tax, the stability task force mentioned was, you know, starting at a certain point and putting some good parameters around that to kind of protect it. I know you can, obviously, down the road, it could get raised like you're saying, that's a concern of mine as well. I don't necessarily see us reaching our budget goals without it. So my question there, when I look through all the numbers, is how would we even do what we need to do without implementing it? And I don't want to pay it. Nobody wants to pay it. Just, it is, right?
But Councilwoman.
I agree on the conversation around the payroll tax. I don't see us getting to solving our problem if we don't include it in some fashion. So I'm supportive of continued conversation on that for sure. As it relates to the levy, I'm open to seeing what that looks like. But I do get a little concerned when we have 3 things out there on levy. Like, you know, at some point voter appetite, which like public safety, I'm sorry to, I mean, I have to say public safety is the absolute most important thing that we do for our citizens. So in my mind, contemplate those first. So just putting that out there as, yes, let's see what it looks like, but keep in mind that that is a key component.
Anybody else? I do think putting these update around the fire governance questions in there, we are not gonna settle this. Like, it's gotta get, like, it has gotta get back to the governance committee. I mean, we have Councilor Morgan and Councilor Riley, the folks that sit on it. Like, this thing's gotta get done. And I think but like, from our perspective, when I look at the finance piece of it, I think we're gonna have to do more than one thing at the same time here. Do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I want to address that really briefly. So I wanted to give you all an update. I wanted to put it in memo form, but life kind of got in the way a little bit for me recently. But when it comes to the fire governance discussion, there was a pause because of some of the things that were happening in Eugene, right? Because we are functionally consolidated, so decisions that happen on one or both sides kind of impact the other, like it or you don't. So, you know, there was some question about the fee and whether or not that would be, referred to the ballot and what was going on there. So we're kind of waiting on that. But I think Eugene was looking at what is their fiscal impact and their budget, looking at all the different scenarios. And we are also looking in our side, what is the implication of what could potentially happen, right? So like if for instance, there was some kind of split and we operated our own fire department, what would be the financial implication of that? If we had some sort of new kind of intergovernmental agreement, what would look like about that? So, and I just kind of want to talk a little bit about, if you let me, what expectation and hope would be if we went that route would be, I want to see a considerable improvement in the administrative costs of this department, because why go through the pain of that exercise if you don't have some elimination of redundancies? And I am completely open to having that discussion with City of Eugene, and I know that their city manager is really committed to this project, and so and we have a really excellent relationship. So but it really comes down, we have duplication in our HR, we have duplication in IT, just systems wise, and it just really doesn't make sense. So how can we take a model that's similar? I'll use MWMC as an example. There's administrative parts and there's facilities parts, and maybe we can look to that as, so it's just a matter of determining how we can have a more streamlined processes. There's still redundancies in MWMC, it's just not as visible of a department, right? Because it's water and it just does its thing and everybody just trusts that it will, but fire is another thing altogether. So that's kind of thing one. Thing two, I will say, kind of brace yourselves a little bit, because irrespective of all that, we know it's going to cost more. We know it is going to cost more. It's just, what is the scope and scale of that? The third thing that I wanted to sort of say is, I haven't had a chance yet to really talk to the union leadership about some of the things that they've been talking about with their desires for a fire district. That's not really my role. I'm not the policymaker here, but I want to be clear that, you know, philosophically, when you're setting up a new taxing entity, good public administration would say that you should be transparent about what the true cost of that entity be, regardless of the service it's providing. So I would not be supportive, nor would I recommend to this body that we use the city council, the city's permanent rate to kind of supplement another taxing entity. I think you have to stay, you know, if you're asking to vote, go to the voters on something, you should be transparent about what the costs are from the very beginning. And you live or die on that. And that's why it's different to set these up, because you really have to hit the sweet spot just right. You don't want to ask for too much. You don't want to ask for too little. So that I don't know how much the union has had even that conversation, other than we need more money. And nobody's disputing that. And, you know, it's the mechanism and the how. And I don't think we've had I haven't seen anyway, real thought out numbers yet from the union. Maybe they're doing that internally. Again, that's not my lane, but I'm happy to have a discussion about my philosophy and what I would recommend to this body if that was really heavily promoted. I just think that the devil would be in the details. So just letting you know where I stand on that, but it's not my decision to make. That would be this body, and obviously, you know, Eugene City Council would have to weigh in on that as well. Any other questions for me? Okay. Oh, one final thing, I do want to, one more thing, I did go to Mr. Doyle's observation about if we just wholesale removed a library as a service out of the general fund, or from whatever mechanism, be it a levy or just a complete cut. That was kind of some preliminary discussion within the task force. They saw that connection, right? And then they kind of backed off away from that in later discussions. So I do want to say that, you know, your observation, you are not alone in making that observation, but there's a couple of issues. One, we're not solving the whole problem. The task force was very well aware that this is a intermediate step to try to address how do we get a structure in place that has more longitudinal stickiness on how to provide city service. And we're not talking like, you know, we're not trying to grow the city. We're not trying to get fancy. We like being Springfield. We like being, you know, just kind of gritty and doing what needs to be done in a no frills way. And I'm completely on board with that. But it doesn't get you there just on that decision alone. So that was something that the task force realized. And kind of the conclusion that you realize as well, as it is going to take a number of levers that this body would need to determine to try to get a meaningful trajectory on finding sustainable funding. The one comment about the payroll tax that I think that cities are observing is that it is a mechanism that's different than property tax, and it has the ability to have some sort of increase over time that our property tax structure doesn't have. So until the legislature is willing to have the courage to talk about Oregon's broken tax structure, you know, we're really not going to make a whole lot of meaningful change. So it's kind of left to cities to try to figure out how are we going to address providing services on the city level. And, you know, I'm not feeling very optimistic about the legislature after what just happened. So, political thing I will say, and I'm done.
Well, I will say that I work in Eugene, so I have the city payroll tax, and honestly, I mean, I'm not the business, but I don't even notice it. I mean, it's like $3. It's really minimal in terms of the effect that it has on my financial. I'm more concerned about the business. It has to match that for every single employee that they have. But as a tax paying person, you know, and having to look at like what you're going to tax me on, it is a pretty small amount to see coming out of my check, to know that I'm, you know, providing value to a program. But I think that's the other thing, is that we need to be able to show people that we're using that, because there are times when I look at that and I'm like, what am I paying for in Eugene? Like, am I really getting what they're telling me that it's supposed to be for the safety or whatever? So if we do go that direction, we need to make sure, just like with the bond for the roads, that we have clear, you know, things that we can come back to people and say, this is what you're paying for, and this is what you're getting for it. And I think that's really going to be valuable to help people buy in on that, because Springfield does want to support what, you know, they need. So
So I think that's an effective segue into this question about guardrails, which is kind of the thing we haven't dived into. You know, and when we talk about coming back again, this could take a couple of times in the fall, right? So just thank you for being patient as we kind of develop this. One of the real things that I think we've got to have is like the road report, annual report has been super effective. Like, I don't know what a version of that looks like here, but that was one of the things that I definitely had. Or, you know, and I think we can open up some other ideas. The staff will brainstorm a list of ideas for us, but we've got to get a lot crisper on what we're proposing for guardrails. We haven't really dived into that conversation yet, but like the other one that I kind of had in my mind is a very, very clear process that is in code that we would have to go through if somebody was going to change it, that makes it cumbersome at best, right? That, you know, that we're not gonna, you know, be out trying to adjust this thing every 30 seconds, right? Because, you know, and I don't, looks like, but, right, that is a very clear piece of feedback I've heard a couple of times. I've shared it in the community, is like getting crisp and transparent about what those guardrails are is gonna be important. This is ideas for things that, again, we're kind of brainstorming here, right? This is not meant to kind of hem us in at this point, about other guardrails that they would be interested in if we went further down this road.
I don't quite know how to do this, but I think the most unusual thing about the payroll tax was the strong support it received from some of the folks, especially some of the major industries in town. That was a surprise to me. I did not expect that. And so to that end, I would almost be more interested in, again, I don't have this figured out, but I'm like, how can we make sure?
Figure that
Yeah,
out.
well, there we go. How can we make sure that those voices are at the table?
Yes.
When it comes to adjusting that payroll tax up or down? Because if they're not at the table, if those industries that are paying for our jobs are not represented, then I'm very concerned that we become tone deaf to the business and climate of the business climate, and the industry climate as it is. I don't have an idea, but there it is.
Heard that a lot for the LTD tax.
Yeah.
A lot of businesses.
I'd like to add
Yeah.
that support wasn't there at the beginning of that task force process. It developed because we had this transparent process where they had an opportunity to ask any questions and look under the hood and really see how things were working. So it grew, and then out of that process, we got 9 recommendations with a consensus support of, we think you should consider these 9 recommendations. And I think, you know, kind of a buy-in in terms of recognizing that they could be ambassadors going out into the community and helping educate. Because really, what influenced their decisions was the education they experienced on our local government over those 9 weeks.
Good feedback. You have enough direction on your.
Well, I have really good direction on the library reduction and a levy scenario. And so that's something then we'll plan on a work session to bring back that information. I also interested in payroll tax, guardrails and what those could potentially look like. I think also just some brainstorming I've done is I would think that you would also want to just how that process is going to work in terms of the steps involved. I think it's going to probably be done through an ordinance, but just kind of a clear sort of direction on what the process looks like for implementing a payroll tax. I think right now we're looking at, you know, the recommendation was a 0.1 employer, 0.1 employee, considerably less than across the free. Feel small to you should feel even smaller, but you know, that was not sort of staying. What they really were trying to say is to raise that target of 2.3 million. And so we've got to kind of dial in what the exact amount is, but I'm wondering if it'd be helpful to also just understand what small variations and how they could impact that. So if it was 0.11, you're getting into the 1/10,000th, but that can have a significant impact. So does that sound like useful information?
I think also an understanding, right? Because I think we're all thinking through the business conversation. Like, we have a bunch of different firms in town, right? Understanding who's kind of paying what at what level, right? And then, you know, kind of the broader question of like, how are we really impacting folks? Because now we're gonna have to start turning this from a kind of conceptual conversation to get some more meat so that folks can weigh in on what direction they feel we should go.
So I want to address that question really quickly. We are still using Sarah with Eco Northwest to help us figure out like what the impact will be on some of our employers, especially some of our larger employers, because that's been kind of a natural question of you as policymaking board. And so that's something that we're working on, but it's not a public kind of our stuff, you know, it's all public and we, you know, anybody can go and look at it and splice and dice data however you want to, but you know, with private industry, it's a little bit more, it's a little bit more complicated because you have to look at the Department of Revenue and get a, you know, data that's maybe not as refined. But it is something that we think is important at least to get, so it may not have the level of precision that we would love, but at least we can get sort of a order of magnitude idea.
Probably a silly question and feel free to make fun of me for asking it, but do government entities pay payroll tax? I know we don't pay, okay, so it would affect school district. Okay.
And that's a good, actually, thank you for bringing that up. That is a distinction because not just government, but other nonprofits that would be tax exempt on their property taxes would then, if they had employees, be subject to that, yes.
Yeah, because I work for Eugene, so I don't pay it.
Well, actually, this is a good clarifying question, right? When we're gonna use the Counselor Doyle, and I apologize here. She works in the city of Eugene, right? She lives in Springfield. Thank you. Would she pay it if she's leaving Eugene and driving to Springfield, or leaving Springfield and working in Eugene?
Yeah, no, and that's a good point as well, because how they've determined who pays in Eugene, it's based where the headquarters is as opposed to where the work is done. So it's potential, depending on how we implement the way that most people would implement is where the work is done. So closely with them to make sure that there isn't a situation where there's a double taxation if you were to implement it.
I think understanding the two things, getting super clear on, we have a lot of people that drive over the freeway to work, right? And we're not interested in sort of double taxing them, and then, you know, making sure that we're not putting somebody in a situation where they manage to get hit by both folks. Go ahead, Councilor Blackwell.
So just to follow up to that too, has the 2.3 estimated has the cost to the city and to our police budget, and like, has that all been considered, I guess, in that revenue?
Yes.
Okay.
And in fact, in that model, I built in, rather than the 2.3, I did build in the 0.1 from our initial estimates is pretty close. And so in the model, I built in the 0.1.
Go ahead.
So then, I understand that you're doing a smaller amount, let's say, than Eugene. Have you looked at it? If it was equal to that, would that like eliminate the need for a cut to the library or, you know, more on the, you know, the levy for the police or something like that? Is that being considered is all?
Task force did, because, you know, one of the things we also asked them is how they felt about the levies, if the levies were a good way to support fire and police, and we got a resounding yes. They've been renewed consistently since 2002, and people felt that they were working, and why change something that's working? So that idea of the possibility of, you know, doing a rate comparable to Eugene and then retiring something, and there wasn't that interest. What was important to them was a very small amount, and it's just kind of a diversity of a tax base. Something different, but that was considered as part of the task force's deliberations.
Increase that payroll tax and reduce the amount you're taking from the library. That's what I'm trying to find out, like how much of this is it? It's $500,000.
And that's
How
why
much is it gonna be?
come up with the degrees. I could give you some really simple tools to where you could do fast math and figure that out.
Councilor Blackwell.
There was some discussion in the videos that staying where they suggested kept us competitive too. Springfield as far as business.
Okay, any other questions from a finance perspective? And then we'll switch to.
For, you know, just to get a little bit of clarification, so I'm going to bring back the payroll tax and the library reduction levy in the full. There were 9 recommendations that touches on 2 of the 9. The fire levies already happened. That's the third one. Regarding others, I think some of them were already working on those recommendations. Others would, and there we go, would require some additional work. But another recommendation from the task force was not to bite off too much all at once, because this is, you know, kind of complicated things that are going to require a lot of community engagement and education, and to go slow. So are we comfortable just in the in the library reduction / levy, and then potentially visiting at a later date the other recommendations for working those into our planning?
Go ahead.
I'm comfortable, and I think that some of those, and I think we touched on this before, some of them we really are already working on, the development opportunities. Says in the Gateway employment area, we got some infrastructure work to do over there first. But I think that some of these are already moving in some ways. The lobbying and working to modernize Oregon's revenue system, developing and implementing a business retention and expansion strategy. I think some of the things we have the foundation for it. So as long as we don't lose them, and they're happening in some ways, but I'm comfortable focusing on the ones that we're talking about, getting started on the revenue pieces.
I think I agree. I think some of these, just adding some commentary when we get back saying, oh yeah, we are working on this one now, because we know like the CETA group's doing some of it. And then the other question that I'm kind of thinking about just a little bit long term is, right, this is really the basis of a lot of the strategy that we're following as a city going forward, and how we kind of finalize this becomes super important. But like, you know, the overtime question, right? That's been something that has been talked about, and you know, and the city manager says it's under control. So just, I think just going through and going, hey, we've talked about 3, 4 of them are actually in flight with CETA, right? And here's the ones where you've provided no guidance on. I think that would be helpful. Anybody else want to jump in here?
I
Okay,
agree, sounds good.
cruising right along.
Good evening, Mayor and Councilors. Elise Ditzel, City Public Information Officer here. Thank you for the opportunity to walk through the Summer Public Outreach Plan. This strategy is designed to support your engagement with the community as we move forward with the Fiscal Stability Task Force recommendations. The materials that were provided in your packet are based on my experience as a communications professional and are intended to serve as a starting point for your conversations with interested groups in the broader public. I welcome your feedback, and whether that's refining, expanding, or adjusting any part of the toolkit to better support your needs. In developing this plan, I focused on 3 key goals: building public understanding of the city's fiscal position, reinforcing our shared values like openness, fiscal responsibility, and community resilience, and laying the foundation for meaningful two-way communication. The plan proposes a phased approach, beginning with communications following tonight's meeting and continuing with broader public engagement throughout the summer. Each of you received a copy of the toolkit, and it includes a sample postcard-sized handout with a QR code linking to a community feedback survey, social media templates to help share consistent updates, and a copy of the survey questions. We're also coordinating listening sessions and group presentations, and we'll be tracking community participation and feedback to help guide next steps. This is a key opportunity to meet residents where they are, whether at parks or other community venues and summer events, and invite them into the process early before any decisions have been finalized. And I'm happy to walk through any of the tools or answer questions about the proposed strategy. And I thank you again for your time and your leadership in helping moving this conversation forward.
I'll kick it off. That's great, and I really appreciate you doing all of this work and creating the tools and things. In terms of my feedback, I'm interested in how do we get to the people and the places that we don't normally get to. like, I really appreciated down here that I saw union meetings and online platforms. But I think, and I'm just gonna be sharing a little bit of a bias here. I think that when we talk about the business community, we often think of that as being just entwined with the chamber. But there are a lot of small businesses or minority or women-owned businesses that aren't necessarily members of the chamber. So I don't know what that looks like because you're the pro, but there is probably some ways to sort of touch base with some of those businesses that don't ordinarily come to the chamber roundtables or things like that. And it could be, community meetings or things that we're able to attract them. And then the other piece that's not in here, and I know that this puts a lot of work on you, but I'm interested in maybe doing some specific outreach in my ward, that there might be people who would want to come and talk to me that might not necessarily come to a thing, so that there might be some contacts that we have that we can be like, well, host a thing at the school or something like that. So I think that those are the pieces that I'm saying. And the other thing is there a way to specifically sort of target reaching sort of age demographics, older folks? Like, could we go to some, retirement communities or places where we get that feedback? Because a lot of those folks are voters and have really strong opinions around, and we're trying to take those considerations in when we consider revenue. So I'm just like, how do we diversify that without making too much work? Is it stuff that I can do to help? I'm not gonna put my other counselors to work, but I would absolutely work my ward in some ways if that's helpful.
No, I really appreciate that. That's great. With regards to specific individual groups that you would be interested in reaching out to, I'd be more than happy to help you in whatever way is most helpful. I can assist with setup, provide printed materials. I can help facilitate, getting the word out and making sure that people are coming to what particular venue is, and simply be present also to help support with messaging and logistics. So I'm here. This is what I'm happy to help in whatever way I can. Also with regards to reaching maybe individuals that aren't part of the chamber or other underrepresented groups is definitely something that's been on my mind. And so one of the things that I would like to do is continue to coordinate with community partners and to help share materials and extend our reach. One of the ways that we could do that is by also establishing listening sessions that we would host in really high traffic locations, so that we can either like at a park or a community center, make that participation as easy as possible, and that people would be, again, we would communicate that that is happening and that such and such individuals would be present to answer questions and to continue that conversation. I'm also open to other pop-up outreach opportunities as they come online. And if you hear about something, you can share it with me and we can work to make that happen.
Councilor Doyle.
So I love that because Counselor Blackwell and I have been wanting to do a town hall together. The wards are side by side, and we've talked about like Volunteer Park, which is like right on 42nd, which is sort of the split for our groups, or somewhere that's where we could bring in people, not just the stability, but just, hey, I'm your, I hate that when politicians only show up like once every 4 years when they want your vote, right? I want to be able to communicate with those people. And so we've been trying to figure out a way that we could say, hey, even a voting, we're 2 years off from voting, but we want to talk to you. And so it's how do we get a hold of the people in Ward 4 and 5 to let them know that an event, and I know I would be very much open to that because we've both been talking about doing it later in the summer and we could kind of get our schedules coordinated. So I would absolutely love to do that because I'm sure there's other things people would like to talk about too and ask about.
Wonderful. That's why I'm here.
Cool.
And I just have one more piece around the tools. So a lot of the people talk about, like I should probably say it before we end. My other suggestion, and I'm gonna say it with gentleness and kindness, is when I was looking at this, the feedback survey, to maybe go over it with this plain language lens, because I think that even terms like fiscal challenges can be, like that there could be ways that we can talk about this. That, that would be really easier for people to sort of absorb it.
Thank you.
Well, if I could make a suggestion for Councilor Blackwell and Doyle, maybe the Hillview Baptist Church.
Yeah.
because she wasn't actually elected, she was running, and they weren't allowed to do that because they can't like take sides. But now that we're both elected officials, they said that they could do that. Daniel said he could do that.
I was going my brilliant idea, but, and I think what would help also, I'm interested in doing a specific library town hall, meet with the library groups. You know, if we could, like, we can do that during the summer, that way we can talk more, like. The folks talk a couple of times about it, but just having a broader Q and A with the groups and listen about their concerns, I think would be really helpful.
So if somebody that's done a lot of event planning in Oregon, we do have this thing called weather. And, you know, in the summertime, our people really don't like to go to events unless it's, you know, their personal time. So I try to be cautious of the fact that there's this very narrow window. I would suggest we do it a little bit more later summer, like you were saying, Mayor, or closer to the fall. Because I swear, because you have like a slip window of, okay, let's have this event. Even if it's not at City Hall, you're going somewhere, asking people to come out outside of their work hours. And then during the summer, when we only have like 3 months of nice weather in this state. And then you get into hunting season, which is a total other thing in Oregon. So you have to think about all these weird parameters. And when I was in, it's funny, when I was in California, they don't have to think about that at all. So, you know.
The other thing that I think would be helpful is, if the council tabled it, because I'm sure we have a table at the block party.
Yeah, already.
Well, you know, Counselor Broadley's not gonna sign everybody else up for things, but I'm gonna sign folks up. I think two other things, and then we'll get wrapped up here. One of the things I would like to do, and this is not a public information piece, but I think when we get to the end of this, we do need to actually have a public hearing about it. And just, you know, right, we've gotten a lot of public input, but we need to have some way to sort of formally consider that and just get really clear with people about, you know, when we're actually gonna make the decision, because we're about halfway through here and people are super engaged, and I don't want to get to the fall and have them feel like they've lost this conversation. All right. Any other feedback that you guys offer? Enough.
Yes, thank you very much.
Remember one quick thing. One other opportunity is we are partnering with Milano Lane for National Night Out this week. So that will be at the Bob Keeper Center, much larger location. So that'll be another good opportunity for.
I think that is gonna be it. Last meeting for the summer, the next meeting is what, September, do we decide September 2nd? Okay, September 2nd. So I know we've done it since spring break, we've done a ton of work, and I know how hard every one of you guys worked. So enjoy your summer, and then we'll talk probably sooner than you think. All right,